All right, good evening and welcome to the Carl Jackson Show podcast. This is your daily dose of objective truth in a world of confusion and lies. Guys, I got a different type of show for you today, and I think it's a very important show. Obviously, we are still awaiting the jury's deliberation or the jury's decision as they deliberate with the Trump hush money case. But also, we know the Biden administration, in my opinion, this is a big government administration. This is an administration that is doing everything possible to strengthen or enlarge the size of the government and decrease the power of we the people. One of the things that the Biden administration is doing, and I didn't know to what extent, and this is why I have my guest on, and I'll introduce her shortly. But if I told you that the farmers in the United States of America are under attack from the federal government, would you believe me? And obviously, this is going to impact you. I know that many people listening to this show or watching this show would believe me, but I brought a guest on that is an expert in this industry. Her name is Brianna Sagdahl. You can find her writings at beefnews.org. She is the senior writer and research fellow at the I Am Texas Slim Foundation. Brianna, welcome to the Carl Jackson Show.
Thank you so much for having me on, Mr. Jackson. I'm grateful to be here.
All right. Well, I didn't see my dad in the background, Brianna, but I'm straight up Carl here. So it is great to have you on. But I am just straight up Carl to you. I appreciate you coming on. And one of the things that I've been finding about your writing, listen, I like to joke around and kid that I'm a brilliant guy when it comes to all subjects. I am not, but I count on smart people and reading smart people, and especially smart people that can dumb things down for me where that I can understand. And one of the ways that you can spot a good writer, in my opinion, because I've done some writing in the past and spot real talent, is when somebody can take a complex issue and make it really digestible and easy to understand. You have that ability to do that. I've just read through a couple of your columns, and I can tell you I'm thoroughly impressed. I first met you on X, so I appreciate you joining us. But I want to get right into this, Brianna. Farmers versus Biden. This was one of your latest column, if not your latest column. Farmers versus Biden, the breaking farm credit fiasco that nobody is prepared for. And then also, I'm going to talk to you a little later about something that you mentioned in regards to the pandemic and how the Biden administration kind of pulled the whoop-de-doo on farmers using the pandemic with this RFID tagging. So I want to get into that as well. But you start off here in your column, and again, check it out at beefnews.org. I'm speaking to Brianna Sagdahl, again, senior writer and research fellow at the I Am Texas Slim Foundation. You say this, Brianna: America's farmers and farmlands are facing a multi-pronged attack from within the governing structures that are meant to protect the nation's food supply. The Beef Initiative has worked to outline the economic, regulatory, and private interests that are currently driving rural communities out of business. Now, Developing Story helps to piece together another vital component of the total picture. Tennessee rancher and agricultural attorney Dustin Kittle filed a lawsuit against President Joe Biden, for alleged failures to execute his duties as POTUS. According to the filing and Congressional Research Council reports, Biden has failed to appoint 2 of the 3 member board required for the Farm Credit Administration to function. All right, Brianna, I didn't even know that there was a Farm Credit Administration. I'm ignorant of this. I assume many people in my listening audience are. Why is this significant?
So in the farming and ranching community, we have very large swaths of land, and it is, so imagine trying to secure a mortgage on just your regular home today, $200,000, $400,000 home, and imagine the interest rates on that today. Well, the times that by multiple $1 million, and you would have a monthly payment that is completely unattainable for any farmer on a farmer's salary. In addition to that, most of us are paid once a year or twice a year depending on when we deliver our product to market. And so the Farm Credit Administration was born out of necessity in order to protect America's lands and our food security by supporting farmers with a type of lending structure that was built around farmer borrowers, and that was federally regulated so that banks could not prey upon or offer predatory lending to farmers and ranchers.
Okay. No, go ahead. Go ahead.
So the farm, okay. So the Farm Credit Administration is the federal regulatory body that oversees these local lending institutions. And it is one of the oldest federal regulatory bodies within our federal government. It was created in 1916, if I'm not mistaken. And since about the 30s, we have watched as special corporatist interests have been selected and protected by the individuals on the board and have prioritized farmer complaints to particular corporations, well, farmers and especially small family farms. When they make a lending complaint, those complaints are largely ignored. So we fast forward to today with the Biden administration, and we have so it's a 3-member board. We have one board member who passed away and has not been replaced by this administration. We have another board member who is serving in a, I think, twice expired role at this point in time. And the president had just recently appointed one individual who is quite literally learning on the job. So we have farmers all across the United States right now who are having significant issues with their lenders, actually quite illegal activity that's occurring. And in fact, there are multiple, the South Dakota Bankers Association, for example, has an entire website dedicated to reforming the Farm Credit Administration. You have multiple bankers associations who are just up in arms because the way that the Farm Credit Bureau and administration is operating right now is not only illegal, but the lenders are prioritizing these funds for massive corporations when these dollars were always meant to go to small family farms.
Okay, so let me stop you there. Again, I'm speaking with Brianna Sagdahl. You can check out her writings at beefnews.org. She is the senior writer and research fellow at the I Am Texas Slim Foundation. So I want you to check out her writings. But listen, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. We only have a couple of minutes left in this block. Brianna is going to stay with me. But it seems to me, let me just go through this paragraph in a column that you've written, Farmers versus Biden, the breaking farm credit fiasco that nobody is prepared for. You say here, during the Trump administration, former banking specialist Rodney Brown had been tapped to serve as a member of the FCA board. That is the Farm Credit Administration. The Senate Agriculture Committee sat on Brown's appointment for 2 full years, finally returning Brown's nomination to Donald Trump once Biden took office. Then Jeff Hall, whom Trump had appointed Brown to replace, is now the longest sitting member in the history of the FCA board, which you mentioned, serving a twice expired term under Biden. Without an acting board, the FCA has not conducted proper oversight in over 3 years. Unfortunately, this non-functioning regulatory board is tasked with overseeing this farm credit system and all of its lending institutions across the country. Okay, so I'm not a conspiracy theorist. We only have a minute and a half left in this block. Do you see this as intentional, Brianna? Because I got to tell you, this was really weird. But this guy Tedros, so the World Health Organization, just recently came out and was preaching to America about how we need to stop eating so much meat, and people around the world needs to stop eating so much meat. The Biden administration seems to buy into some of this nonsense. What's your take? We have about a minute.
Sure. So I think there's a multifaceted approach, as I mentioned in the beginning of my article. I think that we are seeing ideological priority shifts in governing structures, and it's coming out in multifaceted ways, such as regulatory burdens on small family farms, liquidity shorts, and prioritization for ideological dogma. And what I mean by that are ideological and financial shifts in subsidizing corporations in an entirely new industry. I really don't think it's about climate change at all. That may be what they use to justify it on the surface, but it's about bringing in entirely new industries. So I think there is a bit of a conspiracy in terms of economic warfare being waged in order to plan the marketplace and steer the economy.
I tell you what, let's leave it right there. We'll continue with Brianna Sagdahl of beefnews.org after the break. Hello and welcome back to the Carl Jackson Show. I want to make sure that you subscribe to the podcast wherever you go to get your podcasts, Apple, Google, Spotify, YouTube, and Rumble. All things social media at the Carl Jackson Show is where you can find me. And again, I am joined by my guest. Her name is Brianna Sagdahl. She is with beefnews.org, part of the Beef Initiative. She is a senior writer and research fellow at the I Am Texas Slim Foundation. That is a 501c3. Again, check out her writings at beefnews.org. And before we went to break, we were talking about this FCA board, this Farm Credit Administration Board, that actually just hasn't been functioning, and really, I feel like this is in part on purpose. Brianna, let me ask you. So you have these major corporations, whether it's Tyson Food Corporation that you mentioned, they seem to be doing okay under the regulations that are in place right now, and this basically limp, if you will, FCA board. But the small farmers are the ones that seem to be impacted the most by these lending difficulties, if you will.
Absolutely. And so this is why I take time to outline the situation in general within the farming and agricultural industry as economic fascism or fascist corporatism. Because in truth, this is what we're experiencing from the administrative apparatus, be it the USDA, the FDA, the EPA, the NEPA, right? We have this entire, or the FCA, for this entire administrative apparatus that is selecting and protecting massive corporations like Tyson, for example, and selectively applying regulatory burdens against your average family farm with less than, say, 1,000 chickens in their backyard. So we're seeing this very disproportionate shift, not only in regulatory burden, but then also in terms of financing, funding, and liquidity access. And so this is the issue with the FCA. This is the big part that nobody's expecting. So we're having lenders that are quite literally foreclosing on farmers who have never missed a loan payment. They've always been on time.
Wait. I'm sorry, Brianna. Say that again. You have lenders that are foreclosing on farmers that have never missed a payment, that have been paying their payments on time. I don't understand. Help me understand. How is that even possible?
Well, it's illegal. In all honesty, that's the problem, right? The problem is that our farmers have no right of remedy at this point in time. Number one, because we're not allowed to sue the lender directly. That right was removed from us, the farmers, in the 1980s. But secondly, because the Biden administration has failed to execute its duty in appointing a functional federal credit administration to oversee these lenders and their illegal activities.
I mean, this is absolutely astonishing. So there's no telling how many farmers are perhaps going out of business, losing their land that perhaps they've spent generations on. How is this going to impact the food supply in your opinion, Brianna? Again, I'm speaking to Brianna Sagdahl. You can check out her work at beefnews.org. She is the senior writer and research fellow at the I Am Texas Slim Foundation. How is this going to impact the food supply, Brianna?
Well, every farmer and rancher across this entire country right now will tell your average citizen to A, brace for shortages because they are coming, and B, be prepared and make sure that you have a direct line of access to your local rancher or farmer. And so that's certainly another big part of what we're doing through the foundation and the Beef Initiative, is working to fight for food freedom laws, but I digress. The impact here is going to be that beef will essentially be turned into caviar, and any kind of real food will be inaccessible to your average family. And so we're going to see this shift and again, it's an ideological shift in dogma, in priority, and now in your wallet, where your average family will be offered access to a lab-grown cultured meat, soldier fly protein, something to that extent that is not real food, that is quite literally manufactured in a warehouse somewhere. And that is going to be more financially feasible. And that's essentially how you alter consumer behavior.
And I feel like we're seeing a bit of that now, honestly, even with the price of food in general, the price of groceries. A lot of this has to do with our fuel supply as well. But obviously, you have a shortage of beef as well. Things are going to go up like crazy. I got to tell you, Brianna. I mean, whenever this is, listen, guys. All right, don't rag on me for my eating habits. All right, but I got to tell you, whenever I fill in for one of the national hosts, I have this like ritual where after the show, I'll stop by this Wendy's. I get the same the same meal every single time. And guys, this isn't every day, mind you. All right, but this might be once a week. This might be twice a week if I'm filling in, and I'll get the same exact meal. And I watched that meal go from, I think it was $7 when I first started buying it, and within a couple of years, it was over $11. And I'm just sitting there thinking, Brianna, how many people are literally going to have to make a choice? And I started making the choice. I'm like, I can't pay that much for that. I'm not going to pay that much for that. So I've started driving off, but I will go on occasion. But how much more family that's, lower middle class, poor? And my concern is that people are getting used to these higher prices. How do you see that?
Well, they don't need to. They need to stop getting used to it.
Good.
And quite frankly, they need to demand better from their state and local lawmakers. The problem is the centralization of authority, as well as the centralization of funding, equity. I mean, it's a centralization and consolidation of power. And so I think consumers really need to pump the brakes and make demands upon their local lawmakers and say, no, we're demanding access to the meat and the produce and the fresh dairy and eggs that are raised right down the road from my house. I want fresh honey. I want fresh butter. I want actual real food. And the thing is, the more that we can push local lawmakers to allow us, because it is quite literally illegal to sell meat directly to the consumer. Yeah, this is where the industrialized ag corporations have sunk their hooks in so deeply and have quite literally consolidated the marketplace. And so as consumers become aware and educated on their rights and start talking to local lawmakers, the hope is that we can expand the laws to protect consumer access to food. And the truth is that if you were to enter into a farm share agreement with your local cattle rancher, for example, right now, your cost is going to be so much less per pound than if you were to go to the grocery store any day of the week. So you're going to save money. It's going to be more environmentally friendly. In addition, you're going to be able to provide your family with a bulk amount of nutrient dense grass fed foods. And so that's why our founder, Texas Slim, created the Beef Initiative, because he's a visionary and saw what was happening within our industry and said, it's time to build out the infrastructure, the parallel infrastructure, to allow people to access that direct farmer to consumer pipeline and go and shake the rancher's hand and put in a bulk order for half of a cow or a full cow or whatever it is that they need for their family for the year. And we're making that happen all around the country right now.
This is such important work. I mean, we are dealing, in my opinion, we're dealing with commies in the federal government, and oftentimes in state and local governments too, if we're being honest, or a bunch of weaklings that won't do anything and then just allow this stuff to happen. I mean, sometimes I feel like there isn't an opposition party in Washington, D.C., and I feel the same. I'm fortunate to live in Florida, where I feel like we have an opposition party, but I think that's thanks to Governor Ron DeSantis that brought a lot of these state senators and House members kicking and screaming along with his agenda. But let me ask you this. We only have about 30 seconds left in this block. Brianna is going to stay with me for one more block. FDA, USDA, are any of these organizations worth amputating from the federal government, in your opinion? Can we do without them? Any of them?
I think we need Chevron deference to be removed and revoked, and I think it's time to drastically strip the authority of the entire revolving door administrative apparatus.
Okay, so yeah. When we get back, I'll be back with Brianna Sagdahl. I want to talk about the Chevron deference case. We'll be back. All right. Hello and welcome back to the Carl Jackson Show. Again, we're doing something a little differently today, or a little different, I should say. And by that, I mean, we have our guest, Brianna Sagdahl, on with us. And guys, what I want you to know, there's a lot of things that are going on in the news, but there are a lot of things that are happening in the background that we should be paying attention to. Government is getting big. The federal government is getting big. You have people in there that literally want to control what we eat, what we drive. And so these are some of the issues I want to touch on, because I want to be in charge of the government. I don't want the government to be in charge of me. And one of the ways in which the government, the federal government, has been able to circumvent the will of the people is by creating these huge bureaucracies, whether it's the EPA. We see it with the Department of Homeland Security and the weaponization that we see against former President Donald Trump and some J6ers. However you feel about the matter, not every single one of those people are as crazy as the left would have you believe. But these bureaucracies are oftentimes being used by the federal government in order to circumvent the will of the people. And quite frankly, a lot of these people are lazy. I think they're benefiting from it. And I believe that's on both sides. Before we went to the break, I was talking to Brianna Sagdahl, again, our guest, senior writer and research fellow at the I Am Texas Slim Foundation. And she mentioned, and I'm so glad she did, before we went offline, the Chevron deference case. So if you'll bring us up to speed on that a little bit. You touched a nerve when you mentioned that, because I had honestly forgotten about it, Brianna. But I think it's very important for people to understand the ramifications of that case.
Yeah, thank you so much, Carl. So Chevron deference is a 40-year-old Supreme Court holding that began with ExxonMobil. And it was hailed as this wonderful court decision. Well, fast forward to present day, Chevron deference held that the administrative agencies who were responsible for enacting particular areas of law that Congress passed had the authority to, quote unquote, reasonably interpret any question or ambiguity left over at law. And so if there was something that they believed, for example, the EPA believe that Congress intended to add into the, say, Clean Water Act, for example, then Chevron deference has held that the EPA could interpret and promulgate new rule changes in order to come in alignment with their idea of what Congress actually meant. And what's really interesting about Chevron deference is that each one of these administrative agencies, for example, the EPA, they usually have a revolving term, and appointments are made maybe once a year, right? So a president can guarantee that at least 4 individuals that are sitting on that board will be not only their own appointments, but follow their ideological priorities, which is not codified in law, but that is certainly precedence at this point. So the Biden administration has appointed now, after 3 years, at least half the board of each one of our administrative agencies. And now we're really starting to see some very different concepts and interpretations of, for example, the Clean Water Act coming out of things like the EPA. The EPA, as an example, just came out with a new rule change. They sped it through the process, almost overnight enacted it. And this is the Clean Water Effluent Limitations and Guidelines, where potentially out of the 5,055 processing facilities across the left in this country, they could be shutting down anywhere between 845 to upwards of 3,000, to be quite frank. And 85% of our processing facilities in this country right now are already owned by 4 multinational conglomerates. So just to give you an example.
Of course they are. Yeah. Oh my goodness, of course they are. Okay, so let me ask you this. One of the things that our Governor Ron DeSantis did, and I wish he would have done it sooner, but I'm glad that he did do it. But he forbade the Chinese government from buying farmland in the state of Florida because they were starting to buy farmland. And for the life of me, Brianna, again, I'm speaking to my guest, Brianna Sagdahl. She's a research fellow at the I Am Texas Slim Foundation. Check out her. She's with the Beef Initiative. Check out her work at beefnews.org, beefnews.org. I honestly, I am going to be reading you religiously now, Brianna. I mean, I read a couple of columns and my jaw dropped. You mentioned some stuff offline. I didn't think my jaw could drop any further, but they did. But it did. Getting back to this issue with China, how the heck is China able to come into the United States of America and buy farmland? It makes no sense to me. It would seem that farmers would be eager to expand their empire, so to speak.
Sure. Well, and surprise.
Or U.S. farmers.
Right. Yeah. Surprise. This goes back to the Federal Credit Administration, and they're actually very proud of the fact that they're allowed to prioritize U.S. tax dollar funding for foreign entities. So it's actually our own federal government that has not only allowed, but has prioritized lending to foreign entities. And what's really interesting is that since 2017, there's one particular inspector general at Farm Credit Administration, and since she has been in office, foreign entities have bought up 43.3 million acres of U.S. farmland through the through the Farm Credit Administration. In addition, once these loans are being, distressed and put in distress status by U.S. farmers, that land is being repurposed or resold to foreign entities at higher interest rates. So it's quite literally, it's our own government that is doing this. And there's no right of remedy.
Okay, so let me ask you this. We spoke earlier on how farmers are literally paying their loans back in a timely fashion They're still having their farmland taken away, or they're being foreclosed on. Are you telling me that a foreign entity like China could come in and, as the U.S. government or whomever forecloses on this U.S. farmer that was paying his or her bills on in a timely fashion, China could swoop in and purchase that farmland that's basically been gaffled from a U.S. farmer? Is that do I understand that correctly, or is that
Yes.
a stretch?
No, that's absolutely correct. That's that is what has been happening. Excuse me. And not only that, they are being given farm credit loans. So foreign entities have somehow been able to use the lower interest rate lending that has been prioritized to family farms in order to buy property that, in hindsight, may have been strategically located near our military bases, or so that our own federal government says. And so what's really interesting about that, right? And not only do we know this part of it, but with the recent TikTok ban bill, Biden reauthorized what's called IEPA, which is the International Economic Emergency Powers Act, and a whole host of new sanctions authorities. And when that bill passed and Congress gave new authority to the president to force divestiture, which is the sale of shares, can either be real estate or tangible, intangible assets, right? It means that not only does Congress know that it's the Farm Credit Administration that has given lending to and has given access to foreign entities in terms of buying our farmland, but these foreign entities have also been able to cash in on lower interest rates. And this president literally is sitting on the authority to take that land back using, the power vested in him under the U.S. Sanctions, CFIUS, and the Office of Foreign Asset Control. So if there were actually a concern, they could seize that land immediately and then turn around and force them to sell that land back to the United States government. And not only are none of those things happening, but we're being told that this is such an imminent threat that our government now needs new authority and new power to create something akin to a federal land review board so that our federal government can determine who can buy and sell and own land because it's for our own national security. And that's how it's done, ladies and gentlemen. That's how it's done.
Okay, that is scary. Brianna Segdahl on the Carl Jackson Show. We thank you. Okay, welcome back to the Carl Jackson Show. Listen, guys, I've done something completely different, and I know that there's a lot of topics to hit on. I'll give you some of the headlines, obviously, some of the bigger headlines of this week. Obviously, we'll talk about the Trump hush money case, if you will, the non-disclosure agreement case, which is absolutely insane. But this topic is insane, and I think more people need to hear about this. I'm going to encourage you to follow the beef or read the columns at beefnews.org. Make sure you follow this beef initiative. Donate to them. Do you guys accept donations? How does this work, Brianna? I've literally brought Brianna back on because I'm just not finished talking to her. This is stuff that I think we need to hear. Americans need to hear. I mean, we have a federal government that is absolutely out of control. They have all the power that they need to make sure that our food supply is safe and plentiful. And they're doing the exact opposite and selling farmland to our adversaries. This is just crazy town. So how do people, if people want to follow you, if people want to help out the beef initiative, how do they do that, Brianna?
Thank you so much. Yes, we need donations. We are up against multiple organizations who purport to be for the farmer and rancher, but who are in fact bought and paid for by the very entities that are working to take most of our land and regulate us as the farmer rancher out of market access. So yes, you can donate to us. Go on to beefnews.org. Check out the beefinitiative.com. We're on X at Beef Initiative. I'm on X at Brianna9. And please check out our work and support us in any which way possible. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. And you spell Brianna, Breeauna, for those of you that are out there listening and watching. You spell Brianna, Breeauna. So check her out, beefnews.org. Make sure you check out her writings. Okay, so this is something that I wanted to talk about before we let you go. And listen, Brianna is just a wealth of knowledge, and there's some things that we talked about in that past block or last block that I literally I didn't know, and my jaw just dropped. And I wanted you guys to hear it too, because I'm hoping that you guys, plenty of you listening and watching, have the same reaction that I did. But okay, so Brianna wrote another column entitled "RFID Tags in Cattle: Does Surveillance Equal Better Health?" Now, you mentioned basically how we went through this, the COVID-2, the pandemic, the lockdowns is what I call them. But obviously there was a pandemic, and much news has come out about that. We won't go there. But you talked about here, you say, while the United States government and regulatory agencies stand divided on the origins of the SARS-CoV-2 outbreak, the belief in the zoonotic jump from animal to human, a narrative has proven to be about 10 billion times more lucrative to promote, which that's a very fascinating line. And then you say, following a $300 million grant from the American Rescue Plan, the USDA immediately began implementing new rule changes for mandatory tracking, tracing, and surveillance through the Animal Planet Health Investigation System using radio frequency identification ear tags in cattle and bison. So let me just get this straight. Correct me if I'm wrong, Brianna. Are you saying that the federal government used the pandemic basically? And this lame, what we're finding out to be a complete lie, that it was a zoonotic jump from animal to human, to go ahead and create more regulations inside of the United States when it came to tracking, tracing, and surveilling cows?
Well, and not only that, the entire pandemic and the zoonotic jump narrative has been used as a means of prioritizing an enormous amount of funds to what's called the One Health Initiative or One Health approach, which was initially seeded. And gosh, I hate saying this because it's just like, oh, here we are again, but by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. That
of course.
I just, I really wish it wasn't the case. I wish it wasn't true. But yeah, so the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation ended up seeding the World Health Organization and the United States essentially with $10 billion to implement this One Health initiative. And the whole concept is that we are connected as a planet, our food and, so forth and so on, animals and whatever. But it all comes down to a disease model. And so the idea is that we have to track and trace and surveil every last living organism on the face of the planet and plug those into data sets so that we can make sure that everything is vaccinated and, safe and healthy. I digress. The point is there has been an enormous amount of funding that has gone into the surveillance side. And that part of that is this push for RFID ear tags, which is a digital links to a digital database. And it tracks really, and this is where things get very interesting. So funding has been reallocated from NASS, the National Animal Statistics Service, for what we rely on in our industry as the July Cattle Inventory Report. This is also produce, soy, sorghum, corn, right? This is our commodity report. And our lending is literally dependent on these numbers. And they just shut us off. So we're going to get one cattle report and one traditional commodity report a year now from our federal government. Whoever has that ear tag data will own this, the cattle industry essentially, and also be able to predict where the commodities market is in the future. So there's that aspect of it. And then there's just the absolute ludicrous concept that having an RFID ear tag on an animal will help keep anybody safe, because essentially all this ear tag does is it clocks a bunch of information into a computer system. But when that animal is processed, right? So say you're collecting milk from 10, 20, 80 different cows and 80 different dairies, right? All of that milk gets hauled to the dairy. The dairy then pasteurizes it. There's no way to track every drop of milk. Similarly, when you have these massive consolidated animal feeding operations like Cargill owns, for example, they're processing 5,400 cows per day. So you've got a massive vat of hamburger going overseas or maybe to Walmart, and it consists of 5,400 different cows. You tell me how how that RFID ear tag is going to protect, 5,500 different head of cattle in a big vat of hamburger. It doesn't make any sense. So the only logical conclusion here is that those RFID ear tags are to track what happens leading up to the stage of production, which means they're trying to implement new lines of vaccinations. That's the only logical explanation if you know the industry, right? So it will impact, and it will like Representative Hageman has said, it will impact our market rates, because our processing is so consolidated at this point that we have four main corporations who are doing the buying and the packing. And if we don't give the XYZ vaccine and check off the carbon emission box or, whatever it might be, then we can't sell our cows. And so then we're forced out of the market.
Wow. And then you'll just have four. Who are those? We only have just over a minute left. Who are those four companies? Tyson, one of them, I assume?
Yes. Protect the health of humanity. You want one cow per box. You want that single source chain of custody. And so it would make the most sense to prioritize small family farms where people can, as we call it, KYC, know your cow, and know exactly where their food is coming from. Because when you're processing 5,000 different cows per day versus one cow, and you know exactly where that cow has come from, there's no guesswork when it comes to disease tracking and tracing. So it's time to prioritize our small family farms.
All right. I absolutely love that. I think we will end on that note. Brianna Sagdahl, beefnews.org. We appreciate you joining us. God bless you.